The Barrett M82A1 lay disassembled on the scarred wooden table like the pieces of a puzzle only
Outstanding
one
work,
person
soldier.
knew how to
Thank you,
solve.
sir.
Captain
This rifle is
Rebecca
now
Walsh
yours.
sat alone in the armory at 0400 hours, her hands moving with the kind of precision that came from 18 months of turning seconds into the difference between life and death. Before we dive into this story, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments because this story about excellence, respect, and the price of precision is connecting with people from every corner of the world. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Becca's fingers traced the bolt assembly first, feeling for the microscopic wear that could throw off a shot by inches at 2,000 meters. This wasn't routine maintenance. This was ritual. This was remembrance. Shot number 1. Taliban commander Kandahar province, 1,640 meters. The bolt had cycled smoothly that day, ejecting the spent cartridge as a man fell from a rooftop where he'd been coordinating mortar fire on a village market. 200 civilians went home that night because of 4.2 seconds of bullet flight time and a wind calculation that had to account for a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind through a mountain pass. She set the bolt aside and picked up the trigger assembly. Her hands trembled slightly, a tremor she developed somewhere between shot 30 and shot 41. The Army psychiatrist had called it normal stress response to sustained combat operations. The civilian therapist she wasn't supposed to need had called it PTSD. Becca called it the price of being very, very good at something most people couldn't imagine doing once, let alone 41 times. The M82A1 was a beast of a rifle, 29 pounds loaded, firing .50 caliber BMG rounds that cost $35 each and could punch through engine blocks, light armor, concrete walls. Effective range of 1,800 meters in the manual, but Becca had confirmed kills at 2,180. The weapon had a presence, a weight that went beyond its physical mass. It demanded respect. It demanded precision. It demanded that you understood what it meant to reach out across distances most people couldn't even see clearly and end someone's life with mathematical certainty. She reached for the barrel last, running a cleaning patch through with the kind of care most people reserved for newborns. This was the heart of everything. 33 inches of chrome molybdenum steel, rifled with precision grooves that spun a 661-grain bullet at 2,799 feet per second. Any imperfection, any carbon buildup, any heat stress fracture, it all translated to failure at distance. Shot number 41, Syrian border, 2,180 meters, her longest. A technical truck with a mounted heavy machine gun racing toward a refugee convoy that had nowhere to run on the open desert highway. She'd had 8 seconds to calculate elevation drop, wind deflection, the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation, and the temperature differential between the 94-degree air at her position and the cooler air at 2,000 meters downrange. The bullet had taken 4.8 seconds to arrive. The truck had swerved, flipped, and 40 families had lived to reach the Turkish border. 41 confirmed eliminations. The number felt heavy in her mind, heavier than the rifle, heavier than the gear she'd carried through 18 months of deployment. Each one had been necessary. Each one had been justified. Each one had been a human being who woke up that morning not knowing a woman they'd never see was about to make them past tense with a mathematical equation and a steady trigger press. The door exploded inward with a metallic bang that made her flinch, though her face showed nothing, years of training suppressing the startle response, even as her heart rate spiked. General Marcus Shepard strode into the armory like he owned not just the building, but the air inside it. 62 years old, 6'2", with the kind of bearing that came from 4 decades of telling people what to do and having them do it. His dress uniform was parade ground perfect, boots shined to mirrors, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders. Behind him came his entourage, A young captain with a tablet taking notes, two lieutenants whose job seemed to be nodding at appropriate moments, and Colonel Thaddeus Garrett bringing up the rear with the expression of a man watching a car accident in slow motion. Becca kept her eyes on her rifle, continuing to reassemble the lower receiver as if she were completely alone. Her fingers moved with practiced economy, each piece clicking into place with the satisfaction of precision machinery built to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. "What do we have here?" The general's voice boomed across the armory, echoing off concrete walls designed to contain the sound of gunfire. His boots struck the floor in quick, purposeful steps, crossing the 30 feet to her table like a ship closing on a harbor. His eyes locked onto the M82 immediately. You couldn't miss it. The rifle dominated the table, its components arranged in perfect order from front to back. Barrel assembly, upper receiver, bolt carrier group, lower receiver, buttstock, bipod, scope. Each piece clean enough to eat off, each positioned exactly where it needed to be for reassembly. "Beautiful weapon," Shepard said, reaching out to pick up the barrel assembly without asking, without acknowledging her presence beyond the fact that someone had conveniently laid out an expensive rifle for his examination. Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber anti-materiel rifle. Effective range of 1,800 meters. In the right hands, he hefted the barrel, examining the chrome-lined bore with the appreciation of someone who knew enough to be dangerous. This baby can take out vehicle engines, pierce light armor, disable radar installations. Becca's hands continued their work on the lower receiver, fingers sliding the trigger assembly into place with a soft click. She said nothing. The general hadn't asked a question, hadn't addressed her directly. He was performing, using her rifle as a prop in a demonstration for his staff. "I qualified expert marksman back in my day," Shepard continued, warming to his subject. The two lieutenants smiled, nodding along like dashboard ornaments. "Different era, different equipment. We use the M21 system, modified M14, 7.62 NATO. Maximum effective range about 800 meters in perfect conditions. But the principles, the fundamentals, those don't change. Breath control, trigger squeeze, reading the wind. This rifle here, though," he set the barrel down and picked up the bolt carrier group. "This is evolution. Same precision philosophy, exponentially more power. This weapon system costs $12,000. Each round runs $35. The military doesn't just hand these out like candy at Halloween." Colonel Garrett shifted his weight behind the general, his jaw tight. He'd been Becca's first instructor at sniper school 6 years ago, back when she'd been a freshly minted lieutenant who could barely make a 600-meter shot in training conditions. He'd also been in the TOC when she called in Shot 41, watching the drone feed as a technical truck carrying a PKM machine gun and 8 fighters flipped end over end across a Syrian highway. "So tell me, soldier," Shepard finally looked at her directly, his eyes moving from the rifle to her face, as if noticing for the first time that there was a person attached to the hands that had been working throughout his lecture. "How does a captain end up with one of these? Usually these weapons go to our most experienced specialists, soldiers who've proven themselves over years of combat deployment. They don't just—" The words died in his throat. His gaze had dropped from her face to her uniform blouse, to the rows of ribbons and badges that told the story of her service in colors and symbols. Combat Action Badge, Expert Infantry Badge, Ranger Tab, Airborne Wings, campaign ribbons from Iraq and Syria. But none of that was what made him stop talking mid-sentence, like a record player suddenly unplugged. It was the pin. Small, bronze, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. Positioned above her ribbons, directly over her heart, a crossed rifle and lightning bolt, with a single 5-pointed star at the center. The armory went completely silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming. The young captain with the tablet froze mid-keystroke. The two lieutenants stopped nodding, their smiles sliding off their faces like water off glass. Colonel Garrett's tight jaw shifted into something that might have been a suppressed smile if you knew him well enough to read the micro-expressions of a man who'd spent 35 years keeping his thoughts to himself. Shepard's face went through a transformation that would have been comical if the moment weren't so charged. The condescending confidence drained away, replaced by shock, then disbelief, then something approaching fear. His hand, still holding the bolt carrier group, lowered slowly, carefully, almost reverently back to the table. "The ghost unit pin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The boom was gone, replaced by something hollow, uncertain. 51 people in the entire United States military wore that pin. 51 out of 1.3 million active duty personnel. The requirements weren't written down anywhere in official documentation, weren't part of any regulation or field manual. They existed in the institutional knowledge of the special operations community, passed from one generation to the next like folklore that happened to be true. 25 confirmed eliminations, minimum. Not probable kills, not estimated casualties, confirmed. One shot, one verifiable enemy combatant down, witnessed by drone footage, ground team verification, or battle damage assessment. 90% first shot hit rate at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Not on a known distance range, with perfect conditions and unlimited time. In combat, under stress, with lives depending on the outcome. 3 separate mission commendations from flag-level officers. Not routine paperwork, but documented instances where the sniper's actions had been critical to mission success. 0 civilian casualties. Not one, not ever. Because precision wasn't just about hitting what you aimed at, it was about making absolutely certain that what you aimed at was what needed to be hit. And a psychological evaluation every 6 months by a board that included active Delta Force commanders, Navy SEAL team leaders, and Army Rangers who'd seen enough combat to recognize when someone was starting to fracture under the weight of what they carried. The average time to earn the Ghost Unit pin was 10 to 12 years. Some never made it. Some died trying. Some broke mentally before they reached the threshold. The pin represented not just skill, but sustainability. The ability to do the hardest job in combat over and over again while remaining precise, professional, and psychologically intact enough to keep functioning. Becca looked up from her rifle for the first time since the general had entered. Her eyes met his, level and calm. "Yes, sir." 2 words, quiet, professional, carrying none of the weight of what they represented. "Yes, sir, I'm one of the 51. Yes, sir, this rifle isn't just assigned to me, it's part of me. Yes, sir, you just spent 5 minutes lecturing me about a weapon system I've used to save more lives than you've commanded people in the last decade." Shepard straightened to attention, his body going rigid in the way soldiers revert to when they suddenly realize they've made a catastrophic error in judgment. His hand came up, not in a salute, she wasn't a superior officer, but in a gesture of respect that transcended rank. "How many confirmed, Captain?" His voice had changed completely. The bombast was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost reverent. 41, sir." One of the lieutenants gasped audibly, actually gasped like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. The captain with the tablet looked up from his screen, his face going pale. Colonel Garrett allowed himself the ghost of a smile, so brief it might have been imagination. 41 confirmed eliminations put Becca in the top 12 active snipers in the United States military. Not top 12 female snipers, top 12, period. In the entire history of modern American warfare, fewer than 200 snipers had achieved 40 or more confirmed kills. Most of them were dead, retired, or had broken under the psychological weight and were quietly teaching at training facilities where they didn't have to look through scopes at living human beings anymore. General Shepard's face went through another transformation. The shock evolved into something closer to awe. mixed with what might have been embarrassment or shame. He reached down and picked up the barrel assembly again, but this time his movements were different. Careful, almost tentative, the way you'd handle something sacred. "Captain Walsh," he said, his voice formal now, stripped of the casual authority he'd walked in with. "I apologize. I had no idea what you—" He stopped, seeming to realize that any explanation would only make it worse. "I shouldn't have handled your weapon without permission. That was disrespectful to you and to your service." Becca allowed herself the smallest of smiles, barely a shift in the corner of her mouth. "It's all right, sir. You appreciated the rifle. That's more than most people do. They just see the weapon. They don't understand that it's a tool for protection, for saving the lives of people who can't see the danger coming." She said it without irony, without edge, just stating fact. The M82 in her hands had killed 41 people, yes, but it had done so at distances where those 41 people were about to kill others. Every trigger press had been a mathematical equation with lives in the balance. One death versus many, one precise shot versus chaos and casualties that couldn't be calculated. Shepard nodded slowly, processing. He set the barrel down with exaggerated care and extended his hand to her. Not the casual handshake of a general to a captain, not the perfunctory gesture of superior to subordinate. His grip was firm, his eyes locked on hers with the kind of eye contact that meant something. "It's an honor, Captain Walsh, truly. I apologize for my assumptions." They shook, and in that moment something shifted in the armory. The 4-star general and the 28-year-old captain, connected by the understanding that excellence doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand recognition, doesn't need to prove anything because the work speaks for itself. As Shepard walked out with his entourage, Becca heard him speaking to Colonel Garrett in a hushed, almost reverent tone. The words drifted back to her across the concrete space. The Ghost Unit's last major operation. Wasn't that the Raqqa hostage rescue? The one where they said impossible shots were made. The door closed, cutting off the rest. Becca returned to her rifle, sliding the upper and lower receivers together with a decisive click. 41 shots. 41 lives ended. And if she'd done her job correctly, hundreds of lives saved because those 41 people never got to pull their triggers, never got to detonate their bombs, never got to fire their machine guns at targets who didn't have the luxury of shooting back from 2,000 meters away. She attached the bipod, mounted the scope, a Leupold Mark IV, 16 times magnification, mil-dot reticle that she knew like the lines on her own palm. Every hash mark represented a calculation, a compensation for wind or elevation, or the simple fact that gravity pulled every bullet toward Earth at 9.8 meters per second squared, meaning at 2,000 meters, you had to aim 14 feet above your target just to account for the drop. By 0800 hours, the story had spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. Captain Walsh in the armory, General Shepard lecturing her about her own rifle, the Ghost Unit pin, 41 confirmed kills, the gasped lieutenant, the general's apology. Becca walked through the mess hall at lunch and conversation stopped. Soldiers she'd never met nodded respectfully. A table of rangers stood up as she passed, a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended rank and gender. At the motor pool, a staff sergeant asked if she'd sign his data book, the leather-bound journal where snipers recorded every shot, every condition, every lesson learned. She declined politely, uncomfortably, because she'd never understood the desire for autographs from someone whose primary skill was killing people efficiently. Colonel Garrett found her on the range that afternoon, watching a class of new sniper students struggle with 800-meter shots in mild wind conditions. Most of them were missing by feet, their calculations off, their fundamentals shaky. They were good shots by conventional standards. They'd never be ghosts. "You made him look like an idiot, Walsh," Garrett said without preamble, settling into the observation position beside her. "I didn't do anything, sir. I was cleaning my rifle." "Exactly. You let your work speak. That's the ghost way. He paused, watching a student miss left by 3 feet, overcorrecting for a win that wasn't there. But Shepard's not the type to forget being embarrassed, especially not in front of his staff. Watch yourself. Noted, sir. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the students cycle through their attempts. Garrett had been doing this for 35 years, had taught hundreds of snipers, had watched dozens earn their tabs and their badges and their commendations. He'd taught 3 ghost unit operators, and 2 of them were dead now, killed not by enemy fire, but by their own hands years after their combat deployments ended, unable to carry the weight anymore. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Really?" Becca kept her eyes on the range. 41 shots, sir. Each one necessary, each one justified, each one exactly what needed to happen for other people to stay alive. "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a long moment. Downrange, a student finally connected, the target indicator flashing to show a hit. The young man, couldn't be more than 23, pumped his fist in celebration. He had no idea what it felt like when the target was a person, when the celebration turned hollow in your mouth because you just ended someone's existence, and the only comfort was knowing it had been them or someone else. "I'm functional, sir. I complete my tasks. I maintain my standards. I'm here." "That's still not what I asked." Becca finally looked at him. Garrett's face showed the lines of 3.5 decades of this life. The weight of having taught people to kill from distances where you couldn't hear the screams, couldn't see the blood, could only watch through a scope as a person became a statistic. "I clean my rifle at 0400 because I can't sleep," she said quietly. "I count shots instead of sheep. I see calculations instead of faces, because if I see faces, I'll—" She stopped. "I'm functional, sir. That's the best answer I can give." Garrett nodded slowly. "That's honest. Keep being honest, Walsh. The ones who break are the ones who pretend they're fine when they're not." The bass loudspeaker crackled to life, the mechanical voice cutting across the range. "Attention all sniper-qualified personnel. General Shepard announces an Excellence in Marksmanship demonstration scheduled for 600 hours, 3 days from now. All qualified personnel are invited to participate. Competition details available at the range office." Becca and Garrett looked at each other. The message continued. "Competition will include long-range precision shooting at 1,000 and 1,500 meters. First place receives assignment to the new NATO multinational sniper training program in Stuttgart, Germany, as lead instructor. This is a prestigious posting with full relocation package." "He's setting you up," Garrett said flatly. "Let him try." "Walsh." "I said let him try, sir." She stood, dusting off her pants. "I didn't ask for attention. I didn't ask for recognition. I just want to do my job. But if he wants to make this about something, if he wants to prove some point about who should or shouldn't be carrying an M82, then I'll show him what 41 confirmed kills actually means in practical terms." Garrett stood as well, his face troubled. "This isn't about proving anything. You've already proven everything that matters." "Then I'll prove it again, in front of witnesses, with his rules, his range, his equipment if he wants, because apparently 41 confirmed eliminations and a ghost unit pin aren't enough evidence that I might know what I'm doing with a rifle." She walked away from the range, heading back toward the armory. Her rifle needed to be stored properly, secured in the arms room, where weapons worth $12,000 lived when they weren't in the hands of people who'd proven they could use them to change outcomes at distances most people couldn't comprehend. 3 days, 72 hours to prepare for whatever Shepard had planned. She'd faced worse timelines in combat, had made shots with 30 seconds of warning, had adapted to conditions that would make a competition on a controlled range look like a shooting gallery. But as she walked across Fort Bragg in the fading afternoon light, her hands started trembling again, that slight shake that had nothing to do with muscle fatigue, and everything to do with 18 months of sustained combat operations, where every shot had been life or death, where every calculation had been perfect or fatal, where excellence hadn't been optional, it had been survival. 41 confirmed eliminations. 51 people in the world who wore the Ghost Unit pin. Top 12 active snipers in the United States military. And still, somehow, it wasn't enough to just be left alone to do her job without proving herself one more time. She reached the armory as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and reds that reminded her of tracer fire and distant explosions. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed their mechanical song. Her M82 waited on the table where she'd left it, fully assembled now, ready for whatever came next. Becca picked up the rifle, feeling its weight settle into her hands like coming home. 29 pounds of precision engineering, $4,000 of optics, a lifetime of training condensed into muscle memory and mathematical certainty. 3 days until she proved herself again. 3 days until Shepard learned that respect wasn't something you gave conditionally, wasn't something you withheld until someone checked enough boxes to satisfy your outdated assumptions about who could and couldn't do the hardest jobs in combat. She secured the rifle in its case, spun the combination lock, and walked out of the armory into the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a training unit was running night exercises, their cadence call echoing across the base. Sound off, 1-2, sound off, 3-4, 3 days. And then she'd remind Fort Bragg, remind General Marcus Shepard, and remind herself why 51 people wore the Ghost Unit pin, and why 41 confirmed eliminations meant she'd carried the weight of precision longer and better than almost anyone alive. The hardest shots weren't the ones at extreme distance. They were the ones you had to keep making, over and over, while carrying the weight of every shot that came before. The competition range sat on the eastern edge of Fort Bragg, a stretch of cleared ground that ran 1,800 meters from firing line to final target berm. At 0430 hours, with dawn still an hour away, Captain Rebecca Walsh stood at the 1,000-meter line, studying wind flags through night vision optics that turned darkness into grainy green daylight. 12 flags positioned every 100 meters, standard placement for range operations. But whoever had set them up didn't understand how terrain affected wind patterns. The range ran through a shallow depression between two tree lines, creating a natural channel that accelerated wind speed in the middle section while leaving the first and last 200 meters relatively calm. The flags showed consistent conditions, but Becca knew better. She'd shot in enough varied terrain to recognize when official indicators told comfortable lies. She walked the range perimeter for the third time in as many days, studying the elevation changes that weren't visible from the firing line. A 2-degree slope at 800 meters, barely noticeable but enough to add 6 inches of drop to a bullet's trajectory. A slight rise at 1,400 meters that would create updraft in morning thermals. These were the details that separated good shots from perfect ones, the knowledge that came from 18 months of shooting in conditions where perfect was the only acceptable standard. By 0500, other competitors began arriving, 12 in total, all male, ages ranging from 26 to 42. Most carried personal rifles in expensive cases, custom builds with hand-selected components, and thousands of rounds of practice behind them. They nodded to each other with the easy camaraderie of men who trained together, deployed together, understood each other's capabilities. Staff Sergeant Nolan Vance arrived precisely at 0515, his rifle case pristine, his uniform starched, sharp enough to cut paper. 33 years old, 10 years in special operations, Afghanistan veteran with 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart from an IED strike that had killed his spotter and left him with scars that ran from his left shoulder to his wrist. He'd been a good sniper once, better than good, but 18 months of PTSD treatment and 3 failed relationships later, he was fighting to prove he still belonged in the community that had defined him since he was 23. He saw Becca standing alone near the equipment check station and walked over with deliberate purpose. His face carried the kind of expression men wore when they'd rehearsed what they were going to say, convinced themselves it needed to be said. "No hard feelings, Walsh," he said, voice pitched just loud enough for nearby competitors to hear. "But this is a different kind of pressure than combat. Sustained stress, physical endurance over repeated strings of fire, equipment reliability. This is where training and experience separate from luck." Becca looked at him with eyes that had watched 41 people die through a magnified scope. She said nothing, just held his gaze until he looked away, uncomfortable with the silence he'd created. "I'm just saying," Vance continued, his rehearsed confidence wavering slightly, "combat conditions are chaotic, hard to verify exact circumstances. Competition removes all the variables, shows pure skill." "I know what competition shows," Becca said quietly. "I also know what combat shows. We'll see which one matters more in 3 hours." She walked away before he could respond, heading toward the equipment check station where Colonel Garrett was overseeing the rifle inspections. The competition rules were posted on a whiteboard. 3 shots at 1,000 meters, 3 shots at 1,500 meters, 2-minute time limit per sequence. Scoring based on hit accuracy plus time bonus. All shooting from unsupported prone position. No mechanical rests beyond standard bipods. And there, at the bottom of the rules list in fresh marker, all competitors will use issued base M82 A1 rifles, standard configuration, to ensure equipment parity. Becca stared at the rule, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. She couldn't use her personal rifle, the weapon she'd spent 6 years learning, the rifle whose quirks and tendencies she knew like her own heartbeat. Every barrel had unique characteristics, microscopic variations in the rifling that affected bullet trajectory. Every trigger had a specific break point. Every stock had a balance point that worked with your body mechanics or against them. "When was that rule added?" she asked Garrett. "Yesterday evening. General's orders." His face was carefully neutral, the expression of a man who disagreed with a decision, but couldn't say so officially. "Says it's about fairness, ensuring everyone competes with identical equipment." "That rule only affects me. Everyone else brought their personal rifles expecting to use them." "I'm aware, Captain." Becca nodded slowly, processing. Shepard hadn't just set up a competition. He'd specifically structured it to remove her advantages while maintaining everyone else's preparation. They'd all trained with their own weapons, built muscle memory with specific equipment. Now they'd shoot with rifles they'd practiced with. She'd shoot with a weapon she'd never touched before this morning. "Can I at least inspect the rifle I'll be using? Zero it?" "Inspection, yes. You've got 20 minutes before range goes hot. Zeroing shots, no. What you get is what you get, same for everyone." Except it wasn't the same for everyone, because everyone else had trained with these exact rifles over the past 3 days while she'd been walking the range studying wind patterns, assuming she'd be shooting with her own weapon. The rifle they issued her was mechanically sound, properly maintained, but it felt wrong the moment she picked it up. The trigger broke at 5.2 pounds instead of her customary 4.5. The stock was a half-inch longer than she preferred, forcing her to adjust her cheek weld. The scope was a standard Leupold Mark IV, same model as hers but a different unit, meaning the glass had slightly different clarity and the adjustments wouldn't be exactly where she expected them. She had 15 minutes to adapt to a weapon that wasn't hers, to build enough familiarity to make precision shots at distances where inches mattered. Other competitors were doing final equipment checks on rifles they knew intimately, making minor adjustments to systems they'd perfected over years. At 05:45, General Shepard arrived with an expanded entourage. Not just staff officers this time, but a dozen senior NCOs, several company commanders, and what looked like half the base's sniper-qualified personnel who'd come to watch. Word had spread. The ghost unit operator competing against conventional snipers. The woman who'd made the general look foolish, now having to prove it wasn't luck. Shepard took position at the observation area, his face professionally neutral, but his eyes sharp with interest. He nodded toward the firing line, and the range officer called out the first competitor. Sergeant First Class Jameson Rhodes, you're up. 1,000-meter sequence. Time starts on your first shot. Rhodes was 35, a career sniper with 12 years experience and 2 deployments as a designated marksman. He settled into position with practiced ease. His personal rifle, a custom M110 he'd built himself, tucked into his shoulder like it was part of his body. The 1,000-meter targets were IPSC silhouettes, full-size representations of human torsos at distance. Rhodes's first shot broke at 43 seconds. The target indicator flashed green. Hit. Center mass. Second shot at 78 seconds. Another hit. Third shot at 1 minute 16 seconds. Hit slightly left of center, but well within the scoring zone. Total time, 1 minute 16 seconds, 3 for 3 hits. Solid performance. The next 4 competitors ran their sequences. Mix of 2 and 3 hits, times ranging from 1 minute 18 to 1 minute 52. Good shooting, professional standards, the kind of performance that would be respected in any unit. Then they called her name. Captain Rebecca Walsh, firing line, 1,000-meter sequence. Becca walked to position 6, the slot they'd assigned her. Not random placement, position 6 was farthest from the wind flags, hardest to read conditions, worst angle on the targets. More small disadvantages, more tests to pass. She settled into prone position, feeling the unfamiliar rifle against her body. Wrong length, wrong weight distribution, wrong trigger. She had 2 minutes to make 3 shots that would be compared against men who trained specifically for this moment with equipment they knew perfectly. Behind her, she heard whispered conversations, odds being discussed, speculation about whether combat performance translated to competition. She tuned it out, falling into the mental space where nothing existed except the scope, the target, and the mathematical certainty of ballistics. Wind check. Flags showing 10 miles per hour left to right, but she could see the flags in the middle section moving faster, 12 to 14. Temperature 41 degrees Fahrenheit, creating density altitude that would increase drop by 0.3 mils compared to standard conditions. Humidity 72%, minimal effect. Range angle negligible at this distance. She chambered around, feeling the bolt's resistance, slightly tighter than her rifle, requiring more force. The action closed with a solid click. Through the scope, the target was clear, the IPSC silhouette sharp against the berm backdrop. First shot calculation. 10 miles per hour wind required 1.2 mils right windage. Temperature and humidity added 0.3 mils elevation. Cold bore shot from an unfamiliar barrel meant uncertainty. She added 0.2 mils to account for potential differences between bore sight and actual zero. Breath control, full inhale, exhale halfway, natural respiratory pause where your lungs are empty but not straining. Trigger finger pad on the center of the trigger face. Straight rearward pressure building gradually, steadily, letting the shot surprise you even though you knew exactly when it would break. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, heavier recoil than her weapon, the muzzle brake not quite as efficient. She stayed in the scope, watching for impact, cycling the bolt without looking away from the optics. 1.2 seconds of flight time at this distance, the bullet arcing through space at 2,800 feet per second, shedding velocity to air resistance, dropping to gravity, drifting to wind. Target indicator flashed green. Hit, center mass. Time, 1 minute, 4.3 seconds. She noted how the rifle had behaved. Slightly more vertical stringing than expected, the barrel whip creating a different harmonics pattern than her weapon. She adjusted her hold, compensating for what she'd learned from one shot. Wind check again, shifting now, 12 miles per hour steady.
She added .1 mil right windage,
Kept elevation the same since the barrel was warming slightly, which would increase velocity and flatten trajectory. Second shot, breath control, trigger press, recoil management. The rifle spoke, the sound echoing across the range. Flight time, watch the impact. Green flash, hit, center mass. Time, 1 minute, 48.7 seconds total. One more shot, 37 seconds left on the clock. Most competitors had used their full 2 minutes, taking time to ensure each shot was perfect. Becca had built-in speed from 18 months of shooting, where hesitation meant someone died, where fast and accurate was the only standard that mattered. Wind increasing, 14 miles per hour now, the morning thermals building as the sun crept toward the horizon. She added .2 more mils windage, accounting for the gusting she could see in the vegetation at 600 meters. Third shot, perfect respiratory pause, trigger breaking clean at 2 pounds. Follow through maintaining position as the rifle recoiled. The bullet flew through morning air that was warming by the minute, tracking toward a target 1,000 meters away, where a 2-inch deviation meant the difference between hit and miss. Green flash, dead center. Total time, 1 minute, 27.5 seconds. 3 for 3 hits, fastest time so far, with a rifle she'd picked up 20 minutes ago. The observation area went quiet. Becca cleared her weapon, locked the bolt back, and stood up from position. Her hands were steady now, the tremor gone, replaced by the calm that came from muscle memory overriding doubt. Behind her, she heard Shepard's voice, too quiet to make out words, speaking to someone with a tone that might have been surprise or might have been irritation. The competition continued through the remaining shooters. Good times, professional performance, but no one matched 1 minute, 27 seconds. When the last competitor finished, Becca was leading by 14 seconds, had shot the only perfect score, and had done it with an unfamiliar weapon assigned specifically to disadvantage her. 15-minute break, the range officer called. Then we moved to 1,500-meter sequence. Winds picking up, gentlemen and lady. This is where it gets interesting. Becca walked back to the equipment area, her rifle slung across her shoulder. The morning sun had broken the horizon now, painting the range in gold and orange light that created mirage. Heat waves rising from the ground that bent light and made targets shimmer through scopes like looking through water. Vance approached, his expression unreadable. "Lucky wind reading," he said. "Conditions are going to be worse at 1,500. That's where experience shows." She looked at him with eyes that had calculated wind drift in mountain passes, where gusts changed every 30 seconds, where one wrong read meant a bullet missing by yards. "I know what wind looks like, Sergeant." Colonel Garrett appeared at her elbow with a water bottle and a protein bar. "Eat something. Stay hydrated. Your position for 1,500 is assignment 1, first shooter again." Of course it is. Winds shifting every 45 seconds now. The first 5 shooters are going to have the hardest conditions. Morning thermals still building, unstable air masses. By the time the later positions shoot, conditions will have stabilized. Becca took the water bottle, drank half of it in one pull. "Doesn't matter. I've shot in worse." "I know you have. That's not the point. The point is, Shepard's creating conditions where you have to be significantly better than everyone else just to place equal. You need to decide if proving him wrong is worth—" "It's not about proving him wrong," Becca interrupted. "It's about showing that 41 confirmed eliminations means something. That the ghost unit pin isn't decoration. That when the military says someone is qualified to do the hardest job we ask people to do, maybe we should trust that qualification instead of making them prove it over and over because it doesn't fit our assumptions about what excellence looks like." Garrett nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just remember, you've got nothing left to prove to people who matter, only to people who don't." The 15 minutes elapsed like 15 seconds. Range officer called positions for the 1,500-meter sequence. This was where the competition separated amateurs from professionals, where wind readings stopped being formulas and started being art, where tiny miscalculations turned into feet of error at impact. Captain Walsh, firing line, 1,500-meter sequence. She returned to the firing line, settled into prone at position 1. The targets were barely visible to naked eye, tiny silhouettes that shimmered in the morning heat. Through the scope at 16-power magnification, they resolved into clear shapes, but the mirage made them dance and waver. Becca chambered the first round, feeling the bolt's resistance, and something was wrong. The resistance was uneven, a slight catch halfway through the stroke that hadn't been there during the 1,000-meter sequence. She cycled the action twice more, feeling carefully. There it was again, a microscopic hesitation like something was catching. She ejected the round and ran her finger inside the chamber, feeling along the steel walls. Her fingertip caught on something rough. Fresh tool marks, deliberate scratches in the chamber surface that would create irregular pressure when the case expanded during firing. Not enough to cause a catastrophic failure, but enough to affect accuracy by creating inconsistent chamber pressure that would translate to velocity variations. Someone had sabotaged her rifle. Time was ticking, 30 seconds before she had to begin firing or forfeit. She could call foul, demand an inspection, prove the damage, but that would look like making excuses, would give Shepard and everyone watching a reason to dismiss her performance. Or she could adapt. 41 combat shots, 18 months of shooting in conditions where perfect wasn't optional. She'd made kills with damaged optics, bent barrels, ammunition that was out of spec. The chamber defect would cause random dispersion, probably 0.4 to 0.6 mils in an unpredictable pattern. She'd have to compensate through tighter wind reading, perfect fundamentals, and accepting that she couldn't eliminate the variable, only minimize it. 15 seconds. She chambered around, settled into position, and began her calculations. Wind reading, 15 to 18 miles per hour gusting, shifting direction every 45 seconds. She watched the mirage through her scope, seeing the actual air movement rather than trusting the flags. Current wind at target was 17 miles per hour, quartering from left at 35 degrees. Mathematics, 1,500 meters, 0.50 BMG, traveling at 2,799 feet per second from the muzzle, shedding velocity to drag, dropping to gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared. Total drop, 6.2 mils elevation. Wind drift at 17 miles per hour quartering, 2.8 mils right. Temperature and humidity adjustments, plus 0.4 mils elevation. Chamber defect creating random dispersion, she held an additional 0.5 mils right, gambling that the inconsistent pressure would push shots in that direction. First shot broke at 58 seconds. The rifle's recoil felt wrong, slightly sharper than before, confirming the chamber was creating irregular pressure. Flight time, 3.1 seconds at this distance. She watched through the scope as the bullet arced through unstable air, crossing through thermal layers that pushed and pulled at its trajectory. Target indicator, green flash, slightly off-center but solid hit. Time, 58 seconds. She'd learned something. The defect pushed right by approximately 0.4 mils, not the 0.6 she'd anticipated. She adjusted her hold for the second shot, compensating for what the damaged chamber was doing to her bullets. Wind check, gusting now to 19 miles per hour, shifting more to direct crosswind. She added 0.3 mils right windage for the increased velocity, subtracted 0.4 mils to counter the chamber defect she'd measured on shot 1. Second shot, perfect respiratory pause, trigger breaking through the heavier pull she'd grown accustomed to, follow through. The rifle barked, the sound rolling across the range. 3.1 seconds of flight time while she held position, watching through the scope. Green flash. Better placement, closer to center. Time, 1 minute, 34 seconds total. One shot left, 26 seconds on the clock. Wind was building with the morning thermals, gusting to 20 miles per hour, but she could see a pattern now. Every 45 seconds the gust peaked, then dropped to steady 12 miles per hour for about 15 seconds before building again. She waited, watching the mirage, counting seconds in her head. 12 seconds, gust building, 15 seconds, peak, 18 seconds, starting to drop, 22 seconds, 12 miles per hour steady, now. Final shot calculation, accounting for reduced wind, accounting for chamber defect, accounting for barrel temperature rise from 2 previous shots. She held the crosshairs exactly where 18 months of combat shooting told her they needed to be. Let her breath settle into the natural pause, press the trigger straight back. The rifle fired. 3.1 seconds of flight time across 1,500 meters of unstable morning air. The bullet tracking toward a target the size of a torso at a distance where most people couldn't clearly see what they were aiming at. Green flash, dead center. Total time, 1 minute, 42.8 seconds. 3 for 3 hits with a sabotaged rifle. Second fastest time. Perfect score under conditions designed to make her fail. Becca cleared her weapon, stood up, and turned around to face the observation area. Every eye was on her. Shepard stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Colonel Garrett looked like he was trying not to smile. The dozen spectators who'd come to watch were silent, processing what they'd just seen. She walked to the equipment check station, her rifle still slung across her shoulder. When she reached Garrett, she spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The rifle was sabotaged, chamber filed down. I adjusted. Silence rippled across the observation area. Shepard strode forward, his face darkening. That's a serious accusation, Captain. Yes, sir, it is. She ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber one final time, and handed him the rifle. Fresh tool marks in the chamber. Someone worked this within the last 12 hours. The base armorer stepped forward, took the rifle, and examined the chamber with a borescope. His face went pale as he angled the scope to catch the light. She's right, sir. Deliberate scoring. This was done with a precision file, probably sometime after midnight when the arms room was secured. Shepard's jaw tightened. His eyes swept across the assembled competitors, landing on each face, looking for guilt or uncertainty. Who had access to the arms room overnight? Only myself and Staff Sergeant Vance, sir, the armorer said quietly. We were conducting inventory. Every head turned toward Vance. He stood at position 12, his face cycling through shock, denial, and then something that looked like resignation. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Wind rattled through the range flags, creating a lonely sound in the silence. Then Vance stepped forward, his shoulders sagging. It was me, sir. The words hung in the air like smoke. Becca watched him, reading the body language of a man who'd made a terrible decision and immediately regretted it, but couldn't take it back. His hands were shaking slightly, his breathing shallow. This wasn't the stance of someone proud of what they'd done. This was someone breaking under weight they couldn't carry anymore. Not to hurt her, Vance continued, his voice rough. Not to, I just wanted to prove that Ghost Unit standards aren't. He stopped, seemed to realize how weak his reasoning sounded when spoken aloud. I've been doing this for 10 years. 10 years of training, deployments, missions that mattered. And she shows up with 41 kills, and everyone acts like she's untouchable. Like the rest of us don't matter anymore. He looked at Becca directly for the first time. I thought if I could show that you're not invincible, that you can't perform under every condition, then maybe it would prove that the rest of us still have value. That we're not obsolete because we don't have fancy pins. Becca held his gaze, seeing past the jealousy to the fear underneath. Fear of being replaced, of becoming irrelevant, of watching the community that had defined him for a decade move on without him. She'd seen that fear before, in soldiers who'd given everything to the military and were terrified of discovering it wasn't enough. "You just watched me shoot a perfect score with the rifle you sabotaged," she said quietly. "So what did you prove?" Vance's face crumpled. "That you're better than anything I'll ever be? That Ghost Unit standards are exactly what they should be? That I was wrong?" He looked at Shepard. "Sir, I request to be removed from sniper duties pending investigation. I'm not fit to wear the tab if this is what I'm capable of." Shepard's expression was difficult to read. Anger mixed with something that might have been understanding or might have been disappointment. "You're suspended from all sniper operations effective immediately, Sergeant. Report to your company commander for administrative processing." Vance nodded, started to walk away, then stopped. He turned back to Becca, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, truly. You earned every bit of that pin. I couldn't see it because I was too busy being afraid that I'm not enough anymore." Becca watched him go, this man who'd let fear turn into sabotage, who'd tried to prove her false and instead proved himself broken. She felt no satisfaction in his confession, no vindication, just the heavy recognition that the weight of this life crushed people in different ways, and not everyone could carry it. The remaining competitors ran their 1,500-meter sequences. Good shooting, professional standards, but no one matched Becca's time with the sabotaged rifle. When the final shooter finished, the range officer calculated scores and posted results. First place, Captain Rebecca Walsh. Perfect score both distances, combined time of 3 minutes, 10.3 seconds. With a rifle she'd never touched before today, with chamber damage that should have made precision impossible, under conditions specifically designed to disadvantage her. General Shepard walked to the center of the range, his entourage following. He called for attention, and the assembled group formed up in a loose formation. His face showed the struggle of a man whose assumptions had been systematically demolished over the past 72 hours. "Captain Walsh," he said formally, his voice carrying across the range, "you win, obviously, not just the competition, but something larger." He paused, seemed to be choosing words carefully. "3 days ago, I made assumptions about you based on incomplete information and outdated thinking. You could have made me pay for that publicly. Instead, you let your work speak." He gestured toward the range, the targets still standing at impossible distances. "I've been in the military for 40 years. I thought I understood what excellence looked like, what standards meant, who was capable of meeting them. You showed me I was wrong. Not just wrong, blind. Blind to capability because it didn't match my expectations." Shepard took a breath, and when he continued, his voice had changed, become less formal and more human. "I'm recommending you for lead instructor position in the NATO Multinational Sniper Training Program in Stuttgart. Not as a participant, as director. We need people who can shoot perfect scores with sabotaged equipment, teaching the next generation of Allied snipers. It's a prestigious posting, full relocation package, 2-year assignment with probable extension." The offer hung in the air. Stuttgart Program Director was one of the most respected positions in the sniper community, a role that shaped training standards across multiple Allied nations. It was recognition, vindication, validation that her excellence mattered. Becca stood silent for a long moment, processing. Everyone was watching, waiting for her to accept what was obviously a prize being offered. But something didn't sit right. Something about running away to Germany to teach people who already respected her, leaving behind the place where assumptions still needed changing. "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "I don't want the Germany post." Shocked silence. Shepard's eyebrows raised. Colonel Garrett made a sound that might have been surprise, or might have been a suppressed laugh. Several spectators exchanged confused glances. "You don't want it?" Shepard repeated. "No, sir, I want to stay here. Fort Bragg produces more Army snipers annually than any other installation in the United States military. More Rangers, more Special Forces, more conventional infantry designated marksmen. If you want to change assumptions, you change them at the source. She met his eyes directly. Let me teach here. Let male snipers see that a ghost unit operator is their senior instructor. Let them learn from someone who's proven that excellence doesn't require matching outdated expectations. That's how cultures shift. Not by sending me somewhere else, but by making excellence normal here. Shepard stared at her for 5 full seconds, his face cycling through surprise, consideration, and then something that looked like respect. You want to stay at Fort Bragg and teach? Yes, sir. Senior sniper instructor position. I'll run the advanced course, develop curriculum, and make sure every student who graduates understands that precision isn't about looking a certain way or fitting a certain profile. It's about mathematics, discipline, and the ability to carry the weight of what this job requires. A slow smile spread across Shepard's face, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. Approved, Captain. You start Monday as senior sniper instructor. Fort Bragg Advanced Sniper Course. I'll have the orders cut this afternoon. He extended his hand again, and they shook. Not general to captain this time, but two people who'd learned something difficult about themselves and each other over the past 3 days. As the crowd dispersed and competitors packed their equipment, Becca found Colonel Garrett standing by the equipment check station, his arms crossed, a satisfied expression on his weathered face. You could have taken the easy posting, he said. Could have gone to Germany, taught people who already respect you, avoided all the work of changing minds here. Easy doesn't teach anyone anything, Becca replied. She looked out across the range, at the targets standing at distances that looked impossible until someone made them routine. 41 shots taught me that the hardest part isn't pulling the trigger. It's carrying what comes after and making sure it meant something. If I can teach people here to shoot straight, think clearly, and carry the weight with honor, then maybe those 41 people died for something larger than just completing missions. Garrett nodded slowly. You're going to be a hell of an instructor, Walsh. Probably the best this base has ever seen. That's the plan, sir. That's exactly the plan. She walked off the range as the sun climbed higher, warming the North Carolina morning into something that felt like a new beginning. In 3 days, she'd gone from cleaning her rifle alone in an armory to proving that excellence didn't need permission, didn't require matching expectations, didn't have to justify itself beyond the work. Monday morning, she'd start teaching. And every student who passed through her course would learn what she'd learned in 18 months of combat and 3 days of proving herself. That the ghost unit pin wasn't about being invisible. It was about being present when it mattered most, precise when lives depended on it, and strong enough to carry the weight of what that precision cost. 10 weeks had passed since the competition, and Captain Rebecca Walsh stood at the front of a classroom that smelled like gun oil, stale coffee, and the particular tension that came from 16 highly trained soldiers wondering if they were about to waste 3 months of their lives. Advanced Sniper Course, Fort Bragg, the most demanding precision shooting program in the United States Army. 16 students selected from hundreds of applicants, 14 men, 2 women, ages ranging from 24 to 38. Every single one of them Ranger qualified or Special Forces. Every single one skeptical that a 28-year-old captain could teach them anything they didn't already know. Becca stood at the whiteboard covered in ballistic coefficient formulas, atmospheric density calculations, and wind deflection tables that looked more like advanced calculus than shooting. She wore her standard duty uniform, the ghost unit pin positioned exactly where regulations specified, above ribbons that told the story of 18 months in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. The students sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their body language broadcasting doubt, arms crossed, legs stretched out, eyes that tracked her movements with the kind of skepticism that came from men who'd spent a decade being told they were elite and were now being asked to learn from someone who looked like their younger sister. Sergeant First Class Jamison Rhodes sat in the back row, 35 years old, 12 years as a designated marksman, 2 combat deployments where he'd made shots that earned him a Bronze Star with Valor device. His arms were crossed so tight his biceps bulged against his uniform sleeves. Next to him sat Specialist Marcus Hendricks, 26, a Ranger sniper who'd earned his tab at 23 and had been the golden boy of his battalion until he got orders to this course. In the front row, trying to look confident but failing, sat Private First Class Elizabeth Thornfield, 24 years old, fresh from completing Ranger School, where she'd been one of 3 women in a class of 96, where she'd heard every variation of "you don't belong here" that the human mind could devise. She'd passed on her second attempt, recycling through mountain phase after a navigation failure that she'd obsessed over for 6 months. Now she was here, trying to prove she belonged in a sniper course where the standards didn't care about gender, but where the students definitely did. Becca let the silence stretch for 30 seconds, watching them, reading body language, identifying who would be a challenge and who would be an ally. Then she spoke, her voice calm and conversational, like they were discussing the weather rather than life and death at extreme distances. "What's your longest confirmed kill, Sergeant Rhodes?" Rhodes uncrossed his arms, sat up slightly straighter. Being called out first could be a challenge or an acknowledgement. He chose to treat it as respect. 940 meters, ma'am. Afghanistan, 2019. Taliban squad leader coordinating ambush on supply convoy. M110 rifle, 7.62 NATO, 12-mile-per-hour crosswind, mountain terrain. "Good shot," Becca said neutrally. "Mine is 2,180 meters. Syrian border, 2023. Technical truck with mounted PKM, racing toward refugee convoy on open highway. Barrett M82, 50 caliber, 18-mile-per-hour quartering wind. Had 8 seconds to calculate and shoot before the truck reached effective range of the convoy." The classroom went completely silent. Rhodes's face shifted from skepticism to calculation, his mind doing the mathematics of what 2,180 meters actually meant. At that distance, you couldn't hear the shot impact. You couldn't see details of your target without high magnification optics. You were shooting at something so far away that the Earth's rotation affected bullet trajectory. "So I can teach you how to make shots at distances you didn't think possible," Becca continued. "But more importantly, I can teach you how to make the impossible shot when your equipment fails, when conditions are wrong, when everything says you should miss, but you can't afford to because lives depend on it. Because that's what separates good snipers from great ones. Not the perfect shot on the perfect day, the perfect shot when everything is broken and you still have to deliver." She turned to the whiteboard, picked up a marker. "This course is 3 months long. 60% of students fail, not because they can't shoot. You all qualified expert marksmen just to get here. You fail because you can't think, can't adapt, can't handle the weight of what this job actually requires." Becca wrote 3 words on the board in large letters: precision, adaptation, burden. Precision means understanding that at 1,500 meters, a 1-mile-per-hour error in wind reading translates to 18 inches of miss. It means knowing that temperature affects air density, which affects drag, which affects trajectory. It means calculating Coriolis effect, spin drift, and atmospheric pressure while someone is shooting back at you. She wrote a formula: wind deflection equals range times wind speed times constant, divided by velocity times ballistic coefficient. Adaptation means making that calculation when your rifle's zero has shifted from getting dropped, when your scope is cracked, when your ammunition is out of spec, when you're shooting through a broken window that deflects your bullet, when every condition is wrong, but the shot still needs to be made. Another formula: effective range equals F, equipment condition, environmental factors, shooter skill. And burden means carrying what comes after, knowing that every confirmed elimination was a person, that every shot had consequences, that precision without humanity turns you into something less than a soldier. She set the marker down. If you can't handle all three, precision, adaptation, and burden, you don't belong here. Questions? Silence for 5 seconds. Then Rhodes raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, most of us have 10+ years shooting experience. What makes you think we need to learn basics we've been doing since some of us were in high school? It wasn't hostile. It was genuine curiosity mixed with pride. Becca recognized it because she'd had the same thought when she was 23 years old in her first advanced course, wondering why some instructor thought he could teach her anything she didn't know. You don't need to learn basics, Becca said. You need to unlearn bad habits that work at 800 meters, but fail at 1,500. You need to learn techniques that most instructors don't teach, because most instructors have never had to make shots where failure meant watching people die in real time through a scope. She paused. How many of you have made a kill shot past 1,200 meters in combat conditions? 3 hands went up out of 16. Rhodes wasn't one of them. His 940-meter shot was excellent by conventional standards. It was barely half of what Becca did routinely. By the end of this course, all of you will make 1,500-meter shots consistently. Half of you will make 1,800-meter shots. The best of you will make 2,000-meter shots, but only if you're willing to admit that what got you here isn't what will get you through here. She picked up a training rifle from the desk, a standard M110 that looked well used. We start tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, on the range. First lesson, cold bore accuracy. Most of you warm up your barrel with sighter shots. In combat, you don't get sighters. You get one chance, cold barrel. First round has to hit because second round means the target knows you're there and is moving. We'll see who can actually shoot when it matters. The class dismissed, students filing out with mixed expressions. Most still skeptical, a few thoughtful. Thornfield remained seated, waiting until everyone else had left. She approached the desk where Becca was organizing training materials, her face showing the particular anxiety of someone who'd spent 6 months being told they weren't good enough and had started believing it. Ma'am, can I ask something? Go ahead, Thornfield. How did you, she struggled with the words. How did you handle people not believing you belonged? Not just men, but other women, command, everyone looking at you like you were taking a slot that should go to someone else. Becca looked at her, seeing herself 5 years ago. Young, capable, constantly trying to prove something that should have been self-evident. I stopped trying to make people believe. I let the work speak, shot after shot, mission after mission, until the evidence was so overwhelming that belief became irrelevant. They didn't have to believe in me, they just had to believe the numbers. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail here and it proves everyone right? Then you fail, Becca said bluntly. 60% of students fail this course. Failing means you're not ready yet. Not that you're incapable forever. But if you spend more energy worrying about proving people wrong than improving your skills, you'll definitely fail. Focus on the work. The rest takes care of itself. Thornfield nodded slowly, processing. She had the look of someone who'd been fighting so hard against expectations that she'd forgotten to focus on the actual job. Becca recognized it because she'd been there, had spent 2 years trying to prove she deserved to wear the uniform, before realizing that the uniform didn't care about deserving, it only cared about capability. The next morning at 0500 hours, 16 students assembled on the range in darkness, breath fogging in the 40-degree pre-dawn air. Becca had set up 16 shooting positions, each with a rifle and 5 rounds of ammunition. The targets were at 1,000 meters, barely visible in the dim light. Cold bore accuracy, Becca announced, her voice carrying across the silent range. 1 shot each, cold barrel, No warm-up rounds, no practice. Just you, the rifle, and the target. This tests your ability to calculate and execute when conditions aren't perfect, when your equipment hasn't been verified, when you don't get a second chance. She demonstrated first, settling into prone position with an M82 that had been sitting outside for 2 hours in the cold. The metal was frigid against her cheek. The scope lenses fogged slightly from temperature differential. Through the optics, the target shimmered in pre-dawn light, indistinct and uncertain. Wind reading by feel and observation, 6 miles per hour left to right. Temperature 38 degrees, creating increased air density. Cold barrel meant the first shot would impact slightly lower than a warm barrel due to different harmonics. She added zero point 0.2 mils elevation to compensate, held 1 mil right for win. The shot broke clean. 4.2 seconds later, the target indicator flashed green. Dead center hit, cold bore, in conditions most people wouldn't attempt. Your turn, Becca said, standing and clearing the rifle. 5 attempts each. We'll see who can actually shoot under pressure. The students cycled through positions. 16 shooters, 5 attempts each, 80 total shots. The results were educational in the way that failure teaches better than success. Rhodes, 2 hits out of 5. Both at the edge of the scoring zone, neither centered. His calculations were good, but his follow-through was weak, jerking the trigger on cold-bore shots because he didn't trust his fundamentals. Hendricks, 3 hits out of 5, better, but he rushed his shots, trying to prove speed mattered more than precision. 2 misses were wind-reading errors where he trusted the flags instead of observing actual conditions. Thornfield, 1 hit out of 5. Her fundamentals were solid, but she second-guessed every calculation, added extra time that allowed wind conditions to shift, ended up shooting at conditions that no longer existed. Her miss pattern was consistent, though, all within 12 inches of each other, meaning her problem was mental, not mechanical. Only 3 students out of 16 managed 4 or 5 hits. The rest were humbled by the realization that cold-bore shooting at distance required a level of confidence and precision they hadn't developed yet. "This is your baseline," Becca said when the exercise concluded. "Not good enough, not even close. But that's why you're here. We're going to train until cold-bore shots at 1,000 meters are routine, until you trust your calculations more than your doubts, until you can make first-round hits in conditions that would make most snipers pack up and wait for better weather." The training intensified over the following weeks. Week 2 focused on wind reading mastery. Becca took them to a range with complex terrain that created unpredictable wind patterns. Canyon effects that accelerated wind speed in the middle section. Vegetation that blocked wind at ground level, but left it strong at bullet trajectory height. Thermal currents that rose from sun-warmed earth and pushed bullets vertically. Wind flags tell you what wind is doing at one location, Becca explained. But your bullet travels through 1,000 meters of air. The wind here doesn't matter. Wind at the target doesn't matter. You need to read wind in the middle third of bullet flight. That's where your deflection happens. She taught them to read mirage through scopes, watching heat waves that showed actual air movement invisible to naked eye. Taught them to watch vegetation at different distances, seeing how grass moved at 400 meters versus bushes at 800 meters versus trees at 1,200 meters. Taught them that wind was 3-dimensional, that vertical currents mattered as much as horizontal, that shooting through a valley versus across a ridge changed everything. Rhodes adapted quickly. His pride pushed him to prove he could master what the young captain with the ghost unit pin made look easy. By week 3, he was making consistent wind calls at 1,200 meters, reading terrain effects that he'd missed for 12 years of shooting. Week 4 introduced equipment failure scenarios. Becca deliberately gave students rifles with issues. Loose scope mounts that shifted zero, damaged optics that created parallax errors, worn barrels that sprayed shots inconsistently, triggers that broke heavy and unpredictable. Your rifle will fail, she told them. Scope will break. Barrel will foul. Ammunition will be substandard. Can you still make the shot? Hendricks discovered his scope mount was loose halfway through a string of fire at 1,500 meters. Instead of requesting a replacement, he remembered Becca's competition story about the sabotage chamber. He calculated how much the loose mount was shifting his zero, added compensation to his hold, and finished the string with 3 out of 5 hits. Not perfect, but functional despite equipment failure. Now you're thinking like a ghost, Becca told him afterward. Perfect equipment is a luxury. Making hits with broken equipment is a requirement. Week 6 brought the psychological training that separated this course from conventional sniper schools. Becca set up a scenario that looked like routine target practice. Silhouettes at 1,200 meters, standard shooting positions, clear conditions. But when students looked through their scopes, the targets were different. Adult-sized silhouettes with photorealistic images of teenagers holding weapons. Young faces that looked more scared than threatening. Most students hesitated. A few shot immediately, following training that said armed threat equals target. But their shots were hurried, uncertain, influenced by the cognitive dissonance of aiming at someone who looked like they could be in high school. Thornfield didn't shoot at all. She stayed in position for 30 seconds, finger on the trigger, breathing shallow, then cleared her rifle and stood up without firing. Her face showed the strain of someone wrestling with something that had no good answer. During debrief, Becca addressed the scenario directly. Rules of engagement are clear. Armed combatant is a legitimate target regardless of age. International law says if someone picks up a weapon and becomes a combatant, they're subject to being engaged. She paused, letting that sink in. But your conscience isn't written in international law. Those of you who hesitated, good. That hesitation is humanity. Never lose it. The moment you can shoot at anything without hesitation is the moment you stop being a soldier and become something else. She looked at the students who'd shot immediately. And those who shot without thinking, we need to talk about why. Because combat isn't binary. It's not always clear-cut threat versus non-threat. Sometimes you have 2 seconds to decide if someone is forced to fight or choosing to fight. If you're wrong, you carry that forever. Rhodes raised his hand. So what's the right answer? There isn't one, Becca said flatly. That's the point. This job doesn't have easy answers. You're going to face situations where every option is bad, and you have to choose the least bad. You're going to make shots you regret. You're going to miss shots and regret that too. The question isn't whether you can live with making hard choices. It's whether you can live with yourself after. The room went silent. This wasn't the training they expected. They'd expected advanced shooting techniques, exotic equipment, secret tactics. They hadn't expected moral philosophy taught by someone who'd lived the consequences. Week 8 brought the final field exercise. 5 days in wilderness terrain, students working in pairs, stalking and identifying targets in realistic scenarios. Becca observed from a distance, watching as they struggled with exhaustion, equipment problems, and the psychological pressure of sustained operations. Thornfield was paired with Hendricks. By day 3, she was falling apart, missing shots she should make, second-guessing calculations that were correct, spiraling into the kind of performance anxiety that became self-fulfilling prophecy. After she missed a 1,400-meter shot that should have been routine, she broke down, frustrated tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Hendricks, to his credit, didn't mock or dismiss. He'd grown over 8 weeks, learned something about leadership from watching someone smaller and younger teach him things he thought he knew. "Talk me through your calculation," he said. "It's wrong. I'm always wrong." "Show me the math." She pulled out her data book, showed him the wind reading, the elevation calculation, the holdover. Her mathematics were perfect. Her execution was solid. She'd just gotten unlucky with a wind shift at the exact moment of shot release. "Your calculation was right," Hendricks said. "Wind changed. That's luck, not skill. Set up for the next shot." I can't.
I'm going to fail this course.
Everyone's going to be right that I don't belong here. Captain Walsh told us she missed shots in her first advanced course, Hendricks said. You know what she learned? Missing teaches you more than hitting. So what did you just learn from that miss? Thornfield was quiet for a moment, processing. That wind in canyon terrain shifts faster than open ground. That I need to shoot immediately after I read a favorable condition instead of waiting to double check. Good. Now make the next 3 shots and prove you learned something. She did. 3 hits out of 3, increasingly confident, building on success instead of drowning in failure. When Becca reviewed their performance that evening, she pulled Hendricks aside. That was good leadership with Thornfield today. Learned it from watching you, ma'am. The way you teach isn't just about shooting, it's about building people up instead of tearing them down.
That's the only kind of leadership that matters in this community, Becca said.
We're only as strong as our weakest link. Making someone feel worthless doesn't make them perform better. Teaching them to learn from failure does. Week 10 brought an unexpected visitor to the range. Staff Sergeant Nolan Vance appeared during a training session, wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds since the competition. He looked older, tired, but somehow more settled than he'd been 10 weeks ago. Becca saw him standing at the observation area and walked over during a break. The students watched with curiosity, knowing the story of the sabotaged rifle, wondering what this meeting would look like. Sergeant Vance, Becca said neutrally. Captain Walsh, he took a breath. I came to ask if I could guest lecture. About failure. About what happens when you can't shoot anymore. She studied him for a long moment.
What would you tell them?
That I spent 10 years defining myself by what I could do. And when I couldn't do it anymore because of PTSD, I broke. That I tried to sabotage you because I was terrified of becoming obsolete. That the shame of what I did was the thing that finally made me get help. Real help, not just VA appointments I skipped. He met her eyes. That you saved my life, just not with a rifle. You recommended me for intensive therapy. It's been 10 weeks of the hardest work I've ever done. Harder than any deployment. Becca considered. The students were watching, listening. This could be valuable, or it could be disaster. She decided to trust her instinct. Talk to them about the weight, she said. That's what they need to understand. Vance addressed the class that afternoon, speaking with the raw honesty of someone who'd hit bottom and was clawing his way back. He talked about his first kill, the pride he'd felt, the way his team had celebrated. Talked about his 15th kill, when the celebration started feeling hollow. Talked about his 23rd kill, when he started having nightmares. Talked about the IED that killed his spotter, the guilt that maybe if he'd been more alert, done something differently, his friend would still be alive. I came home with PTSD and no tools to handle it, Vance said. Every time I picked up a rifle, I saw faces. Not targets, faces. People I'd killed who maybe had families, who maybe didn't want to be fighting any more than I did. The Army gave me awards for it, but awards don't help at 0300 when you're awake seeing those faces and wondering if you're a hero or a murderer. He looked at Thornfield specifically. I tried to sabotage Captain Walsh because I was jealous. How messed up is that? Being jealous of someone carrying what she carries. But that's what happens when we make this job only about the numbers. When we celebrate kills instead of acknowledging that every kill has a cost, even when it's justified. Vance described his therapy, the cognitive behavioral techniques, the medication he'd resisted for years, the group sessions with other combat veterans who were fighting the same battles. Captain Walsh could have let me disappear after I got caught. Instead, she personally called the VA, got me into a program, checked on me to make sure I was going. She showed me that strength isn't hitting every target. Strength is admitting when you're broken and getting help. When he finished, the classroom was silent. Then Rhodes started clapping, slow and deliberate. Others joined, not celebrating Vance's failure, but acknowledging his honesty, his courage in coming back to face the people who knew what he'd done. After Vance left, Becca addressed the class. That's the other side of this job, the side they don't put in recruiting posters. Some of you will make dozens of kills and be fine. Some will make one kill and break. There's no predicting it. But if you take one lesson from this course, take this. Getting help isn't weakness. Admitting you're struggling isn't failure. The ones who break permanently are the ones who pretend they're fine when they're not. Graduation came in week 12. All 16 students passed, though 3 barely made the minimum standard. Rhodes graduated top of the class, his pride channeled into actual excellence rather than defensive superiority. Hendricks placed third, his natural talent finally matched with discipline. Thornfield graduated 7th out of 16, middle of the pack, but with fundamentals so solid that Becca knew she'd continue improving long after the course ended. The ceremony was held on the same range where Becca had competed 10 weeks earlier. General Shepard presiding, Colonel Garrett presenting certificates, dozens of spectators who'd heard about the new instructor who was changing Fort Bragg's sniper culture. Shepard gave a speech about excellence in standards, about how the best programs were taught by the best practitioners. Then he did something unexpected, called Becca to the front. Captain Walsh, front and center. She stepped forward uncertain. This wasn't in the ceremony program. 3 months ago, I stood in an armory and made assumptions about you, Shepard said, his voice carrying across the assembled group. I was wrong about you, about women in combat sniper roles, about what excellence looks like when it doesn't match your expectations. He paused. This past week, the Ghost Unit Review Board convened to evaluate your service record. They reviewed your 18 months of combat operations, 41 confirmed eliminations, 0 civilian casualties, 8 mission commendations. They also reviewed this training program. 16 students graduated, all meeting or exceeding standards, with measurably improved performance at extended ranges. He held up a small case that Becca recognized, the same type of case that had held her original Ghost Unit pin 5 years ago when she'd earned it. There are 51 people who wear the standard Ghost Unit pin, Shepard said. The pin represents operational excellence, sustained precision under combat conditions. But there's another designation, Master Ghost, for operators who don't just excel in combat, but who also pass their knowledge to the next generation, creating legacy beyond their own service. He opened the case. Inside was a Ghost Unit pin identical to Becca's, except instead of 1 star at the center, it had 2. Only 12 people in history have earned Master Ghost designation, Shepard continued. 41 combat eliminations, plus training 16 new snipers to excellence, equals legacy. Captain Walsh, you're now Master Ghost Walsh. He pinned the new designation over her heart, removing the single-star pin she'd worn for 2 years and replacing it with a double star that represented something larger than individual achievement. The assembled group erupted in applause. Her students, who'd started skeptical and ended convinced. Senior NCOs, who'd watched her change Fort Bragg's culture in 12 weeks. Junior officers who now had proof that excellence transcended demographic expectations. Becca accepted the pin with mixed emotions playing across her face. Pride, yes, but also weight. Recognition that 41 people dead plus 16 students trained meant her responsibility was expanding, not shrinking. More people would depend on her knowledge. More lives would be affected by whether she taught well or poorly. 3 months later, Becca received updates that validated her teaching. Rhodes had been selected for advanced instructor development, requested to return to Fort Bragg to co-teach the next cycle. Hendricks earned a slot in Ranger Sniper Instructor course, his leadership during field exercises cited as exemplary. Thornfield, the one everyone doubted, made a 1,680-meter combat shot in her first deployment, saved a convoy from ambush, and sent Becca a message. You taught me to trust my calculations more than my doubts. Thank you. Vance completed his therapy program, found work as a VA peer counselor, helping other combat veterans navigate PTSD. He called Becca once to say, "You showed me that broken doesn't mean finished. I'm teaching others that now." The legacy wasn't just in shots made or students passed. It was in the culture shift. Fort Bragg's sniper program now emphasized psychological resilience alongside marksmanship, required mental health check-ins as standard practice, and measured success not by body counts, but by precision, adaptability, and the ability to carry weight without breaking. After the ceremony, as crowds dispersed and students packed their equipment, Becca found herself alone in the armory at 0400 hours the next morning. Old habits died hard. The ritual of cleaning weapons, of remembering what they represented, called to her in the quiet pre-dawn darkness. Her M82 lay on the familiar scarred table. 29 pounds of precision engineering, 41 confirmed eliminations, 2 years of ghost unit operations, and now 16 students who carried forward what she'd taught them. She heard the door open behind her. Soft footsteps, 2 sets. Colonel Garrett and General Shepard, both looking like they hadn't slept either. "Captain Walsh," Garrett said quietly, "mind if we join you?" She nodded, made space at the table. Shepard sat across from her, his 4-star uniform replaced with a simple duty uniform that made him look less like a general and more like a soldier who'd been doing this job for 40 years. They sat in silence for a moment, the 3 of them, connected by the understanding of what weapons like this represented. Then Shepard spoke, his voice softer than Becca had ever heard it. "I never told you this story," he said. "Desert Storm, 1991. I was a staff sergeant, designated marksman with 2nd Armored Division. I made an 800-meter shot on an Iraqi officer who was coordinating defensive positions." He paused, his hands resting on the table. "They celebrated me. Unit record for longest kill. I spent 30 years being proud of that shot." He looked directly at Becca. "Then I met you. Watched you carry your work with honor and weight, not pride. You remember every shot not as a score, but as a life ended and other lives saved." His voice caught slightly. "That Iraqi officer was 19, conscripted, had a wife and baby daughter. I spent 3 decades proud of that shot without thinking about who he was, what his family lost." Tears tracked down Shepard's weathered face. "That's the difference between a marksman and a ghost. You taught me what I should have understood 40 years ago, that every trigger pull ends a person, not just a target, and that deserves to be carried with weight, not celebrated." Becca reached across the table and placed her hand over Shepard's. Not subordinate comforting superior, not young comforting old. Just one person who carried weight touching another person who'd finally acknowledged their own burden. Garrett spoke for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. "I taught 3 ghost unit operators over 35 years. 2 of them are dead now. Suicide, both of them, years after combat ended. They carried the weight alone because we taught them to be strong, to suck it up." He looked at Becca. "You're teaching something different. Teaching that carrying the weight together, acknowledging the cost, admitting when you're struggling, that's real strength." Becca felt the weight of both men's confessions, the vulnerability they were showing. She thought about her ritual, the cleaning at 0400 hours, the counting of shots instead of sleeping. "Every one of the 41 has a name, a story," she said quietly, her hands moving through the familiar cleaning ritual. Not to feel guilty, every shot was justified, necessary, but to remember that justification doesn't erase the human cost. They were people who made choices that forced me to make choices. That deserves to be remembered with both honor and weight. Shepard nodded slowly. "How do you teach that? How do you prepare someone for carrying that kind of weight?" "You don't," Becca said honestly. "You can't prepare someone for what it feels like to watch a person die through a scope. You can only teach them that when it happens, when they start carrying that weight, they're not alone. That seeking help isn't weakness. That remembering the cost doesn't mean you did something wrong. She picked up her new Master Ghost pin from where she'd set it on the table, studying the 2 stars that represented combat and teaching. This pin doesn't mean I'm invincible. It means I survived long enough to pass forward what I learned. And what I learned is that the hardest shot isn't at 2,000 meters. It's knowing when not to pull the trigger. It's carrying the weight and teaching others to shoot straight, while also teaching them to carry the weight with honor instead of pride. Garrett stood, walked to the wall where training certificates from decades of courses hung in frames. You're changing the culture here, Walsh. These walls have seen thousands of snipers trained over 50 years. Most graduated learning to kill efficiently. You're teaching them to kill precisely and carry it humanely. That's revolutionary. It's necessary, Becca corrected. We can't keep training people to celebrate body counts and then acting surprised when they break 10 years later. That changes now, here, with every student I train. Shepard stood as well, composing himself. Thank you, Captain, for teaching an old soldier what he should have learned decades ago. That respect isn't about celebrating violence. It's about acknowledging its cost, even when it's necessary. He extended his hand. They shook, not general to captain this time, not mentor to student or old to young. 2 people who carried weight, sharing the burden for a moment through honest acknowledgement that the weight existed. As both men left, Becca returned to her rifle. The sky was lightening now, pre-dawn gray turning to the purple that preceded sunrise. In 3 hours, she'd start preparing curriculum for the next advanced course. 16 new students in 4 weeks, another generation of snipers who needed to learn not just precision, but also the humanity required to survive precision. Her hands moved through the familiar ritual. Barrel cleaned, chamber inspected, bolt lubricated, scope mounted, rifle assembled. 29 pounds of engineering that represented 41 lives ended and hundreds of lives saved. A tool of protection that demanded precision, a burden that demanded honor. The sun broke the horizon, flooding the armory with golden light. Becca secured her rifle in its case, the 2-star Master Ghost pin catching light like a promise and a burden combined. Outside, Fort Bragg was waking up, formations running morning PT, their cadence calls echoing across the base. New students arriving for basic sniper courses. Officers heading to briefings where they'd make decisions about who deployed where and who carried which burdens. She walked out into that morning light, carrying her rifle case, wearing her pin, holding the weight of 41 remembered souls and 16 students trained to remember their own. 41 confirmed eliminations. 16 students graduated with 3 more classes scheduled. And the understanding that excellence wasn't about perfection. It was about carrying the burden with honor, teaching others to do the same, and ensuring that precision never came at the cost of humanity. The hardest shots weren't at impossible distances. They were the ones you carried forever, and the wisdom to teach others how to carry theirs.